you're highlighting taking advantage of them, right? Which obviously wasn't the point. And I know that you're not like, look at me, I'm a bad person, I'm gonna come in and take over, right? But it just shows a potential lack of concern or really thinking through that whole process. Application Renovation Season 2, Episode 8. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm excited to dive into your application, your story, hear kind of what your path has been, and specifically for the application, right? This is application renovation. See how we can renovate your application to hopefully make it stronger for your next application cycle. I want to start with kind of your own reflection of your journey, of your application, to see from a self-critique standpoint where you think you could have been stronger with your application.
Sure. So now that I've had, the time to reflect on the whole application season, I realized that one of the biggest things that was very harmful in my application season, more of a downfall, was my MCAT score. I didn't get the score necessarily that I was hoping for. And, even going into the MCAT, I feel that I had a very unique experience. I was preparing for different scenarios, but never did I think that I was going to experience a technical error during my exam day. So I actually had to, I was in for one of my test days, and then I had to retake it again due to my first exam being completely lost. So that definitely got me in a little bit, scared by the second time that I went in. Also, I think that, I'm not sure if, I know I have a low GPA in my science side of it. So I'm hoping to get some feedback on how I can improve that, whether if that's, making a DUI post-bac or other areas of it. So.
Okay. Awesome. Technical error with your MCAT. Did you get all the way through and like submitted and you got like a notification after saying, sorry? Like what happened?
Yeah. So I was actually about 6 hours into the exam, and my computer completely shut off on me. The IT person that came in, they said that they were going to call IT. They tried to recover my exam, but unfortunately it was never recovered. So I was in communication with the testing center, and finally they were able to reschedule me, but a whole month later after my original date. So.
And after all that stress and heartache and anger and everything, oh, that's horrible. I'm sorry you had to deal with that.
I know. I wasn't expecting, that kind of scenario. So.
Yeah, no student does. Although I hear it a lot, the technical issues.
Oh, really?
Yeah, unfortunately. Computers, if you haven't heard, they crash sometimes, which is not cool.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll dive through your application. We'll see outside of stats. Obviously, stats can always be improved, but we'll look at your stats and see, as you mentioned, kind of what the next steps maybe should be, whether it's a post-bac, a master's, whatever. Obviously, potentially retaking the MCAT, as we will look at.
Yes.
And then just the rest of your story and potentially how to better frame your story and who you are and why you want to do this.
Sure.
Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. So as we look at your application, I can see right off the bat, awesome. Good on you for submitting your application so early. As you had mentioned, you probably took the MCAT before you submitted. Then that was canceled, and then you had to retake it after you submitted, and so like a lot of people, and I even had that question of, well, why did you potentially submit your application to begin with if you weren't scoring that well or with whatever happened? But obviously, with that whole picture in mind, that makes much more sense. So all right, so we go down through our list here. We can look at no big issues as far as institutional actions, misdemeanors, crime record, etc. And then we get to your transcript, and we can see right off the bat some C's, some D's, lots of C's, one D, I think. And then we get down to your GPA, your undergrad science GPA, obviously not great, 243. Downward trend, if you even want to call it that, from a 249 to a 211 from junior to senior year. And then you took some graduate level classes, but more credits were taken in non-science classes than science. So that's a little confusing for me. And so why not focus more on the science? You did do better, 3.1, still not great. And so from an academic, from a student perspective, my question is, why are you struggling so much academically with the sciences? And why hasn't that been improved yet? What kind of, like the Einstein's definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing over and over again but expecting a different result. That's kind of seems like where you are, although that the graduate science classes is better, obviously is a huge jump from your undergraduate GPA. But how do we get it to a 4.0 versus a 3.1? So those kind of questions are there, and how do we find that support to get you there? Your non-science GPA is relatively good, right? A 3.6, undergraduate GPA 3.63, graduate GPA. So that side of the house you have covered. It's those sciences, those pesky sciences that are potentially holding you back. And then we get to the MCAT score, and it kind of correlates, right? Just in yours, I'm not saying there is a correlation, but with you, there's this correlation of weak science score, weak MCAT with weak sciences, and CAR section as well on your MCAT score. So, and you talked about the MCAT a little bit already with kind of what happened there. Just kind of a note to make for me. As you were going through this process with your practice tests, where were you scoring before you went in?
So I was scoring between 510 and 515. That's what I was doing in my practice tests.
Wow. So just a little bit of a difference between a 493 and a 510, 515. Okay. All right. That's a bummer. A big bummer.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
All right. So we'll talk about those plans next. All right. And then we get into your experiences. And the first experience here is data entry clerk. And a lot of people will look at this, and I have it highlighted here as like, okay, you work in a surgical center as data entry. Why aren't you trying to do something more clinically related if you're working in a surgery center? And obviously it's not always that easy. There's a job for you. You have the job. But it seems like there's this huge missed opportunity to do more. And as we'll look at your the rest of your extracurricular activities, I don't think looking at them that you're doing anything more at your job. So that potentially tells me, does your job know that you're applying to medical school?
So I actually was able to get that job through, I was volunteering for a nonprofit called Mending Kids. And I was volunteering as a medical volunteer, and then I was recruited by them. So they knew that I was applying to medical school. They were able to give me, some opportunities in terms of my schedule to be able to, study for the MCAT or be able to apply to medical school. So that's one of the reasons I stayed. Also, financially. So. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. As far as it's income, it puts a roof over your head, food on the table. They know that you're applying to medical school, which is great. They're flexible with your schedule to fit in what you need, which is great. My question is, why not do more? And we'll look at that potential, what more I'm talking about. So, okay. When I look at the description, I see just it's a lot of common mistakes. So students very often like to highlight, I was amazing, they moved me up. Right, and you did that 2 times in a row. with your experiences. I was soon able to learn new skills and contribute ideas, appointed new responsibilities. And then in the next one, right, my supervisor promoted me to the head of the mission, right? Only after 2 weeks. I'm amazing. Look at me. The goal of your application is not to beat on your chest and show how amazing you are, right? You show how amazing you are by just recounting your stories that you've lived through these experiences. When students focus so much on I was given new responsibilities, I was promoted, I'm better than, it doesn't really help you stand out because every other student's trying to say the same thing. So who do we believe in the end, right?
Yeah.
So really focus on your story as much as possible. So specifically with this mountain kids, you start to get into a story here with this example of, right, a memorable 7-year-old girl underwent cleft nose reconstruction, thanked us with a huge smile for improving her well-being and confidence, right? So you start to get into a story. I don't like the focus on the patient thanked us, because when you focus on being thanked, that's just focusing on the wrong side of it. Because when you get into the real world of working, like a lot of patients don't thank you. A lot of patients are thankless, and you still have to love the job. And so when you focus on being thanked, are you focusing on the wrong thing? Are you chasing the wrong thing? Is always the question. So looking at it more, a lot of students like to highlight learning experiences. And so you say here, the experience highlighted for me how small changes can make a huge impact when a community collaborates to help others. That is a very true statement. It's a very generic statement. It doesn't tell me anything about you and your specific experience. Okay?
Okay.
Which, remember, the goal of this application is to talk about who you are. So the other part of this, right? You have lots of hours. You've been doing it as you submitted the application for a year with the plan to continue doing it, which is great. You have it listed as medical and clinical experience, and yet you kind of focus on non-medical things in your description, saying that you were head of the mission planning committee. That's not medical experience. That's great experience, is great organizational leadership experience, but it's not clinical experience. And so I would read that going, well, I see that you put here, like, I contributed to the planning process and provided patient care. Well, how much of this 600 hours was actually patient care that I'm going to count as clinical experience? And so for these types of experiences where you have potentially multiple things that you might want to list, like this is great leadership and organizational skills that being promoted to this mission planning, I want to have that in there. It's not clinical experience. I understand that. And so I'm going to separate out into another experience, clinical experience, where I actually talk about the clinical experience. And maybe it's 400 hours for the mission planning and 200 hours for the clinical experience for the 600 total hours. So really make sure that how you're telling the story about what each thing is and the total hours and everything else really jives with what it truly is. Okay?
Yes.
The next one you have here, the grant co-writer. I loved that you have in here a grant awarded for $10,000. It shows that impact. It shows who you were fighting for with the 61% of immigrant families living in poverty. So it really shows some impact there. So I really like that. You have some more clinical experience. It's older, so there's this gap in what you're doing here. So you have this 516 mission trip to Ecuador, and then the next thing that pops up here is 1/2018. So you have a huge gap in here of experiences, and that's going to be a red flag of, well, what were you doing? Were you a student? Grades? If you were just a student, well, then why weren't your grades better? Right?
Yeah.
Were you taking care of family members like who were ill? Well, if you were doing that, well, why you could put that on your application. So
Okay.
really big question marks why there's this huge gap in your experience. And we can talk about it that at the end. And then I have here, when I saw the mission trip, I said, let me read this to see if she did one of the big no-nos when talking about mission trips. And you did. You said you assisted the physician in medical procedures such as knee injections and house calls. One of the biggest focuses that schools are having with these medical mission trips is making sure that students aren't doing what they're not supposed to be doing. Would you, in the U.S., be allowed to assist in medical procedures such as knee injections?
No, definitely not.
No.
Yeah.
So why are you allowed to do it in Ecuador? Oh, it's a third world country. The patients don't care, right?
I see.
So you're highlighting taking advantage of them, right? Which obviously wasn't the point. And I know that you're not like, look at me, I'm a bad person, I'm going to come in and take over, right? But it just shows a potential lack of concern or really thinking through that whole process. And it starts at the top, right? The fact that they let you do that is bad on them. But it's something that obviously you did it. Oh, well. Obviously now you can think about it, but I wouldn't highlight it in your application. Right? And a lot of students do. You're definitely not alone. I was looking for it specifically because I see it all the time. So tell me the story. Tell me the story of one of the patients that you interacted with that was just the most memorable for you, that left you wanting more, that left you knowing that this is what you want. Right? Those stories are really where the impact comes from. Same thing with the next one you have as a tutor. Tell me a story of the most impactful student that you had as a tutor and how you were able to impact their life. Physician shadowing. You have here, again, really old physician shadowing from 2015 to 2016 for 80 hours. So good amount of clinical experience. It's in Ecuador. A lot of schools aren't going to like that your shadowing is overseas. It is what it is. And so when I look at your application with these older experiences, and I look at what you're doing now, when I said, why aren't you doing more with your current job? That's what I mean. Like, your shadowing's really old. You don't have a lot of it. You work at a surgical center. Why aren't you shadowing them?
Yeah.
Right? Why aren't you potentially getting more clinical experience, saying, hey, I would love to, if I could, maybe one day a week for a morning for a couple hours, can I check in the patient and take them back to the room, and can you teach me how to take vitals and ask them why they're here, right? You have this amazing opportunity with the exposure that you have with your job, and it sounds like they're accommodating for you, knowing that you want to go to medical school. I think you really need to let them know, like, hey, I potentially have some big gaps in my application in being able to tell my story and really show that this is what I want. Can I potentially do some other things with you all?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's what I kept referring to, knowing what I was going to read, because I looked at it beforehand. That's what I kept referring to, and I said, why aren't you doing more with them? And that way, and this question comes up a lot, is it's okay that you're doing a non-clinical job. You, like, students who are in this position, you don't have to go out and get a job in a clinical field to prove that you want to be a doctor. And so if you like your job, you're getting paid well enough, it's doing what it needs to do. Now let's leverage that connection, the networking, because you work there, and say, hey, can I carve out a little bit of time for this? Can I carve out a little bit of time for that?
I see. Okay.
Phi Delta Epsilon Executive Board, some good experience. Leadership, Cope Health, good experience. Research Lab, good experience. So you have some good stuff there. Excuse me. And then we get to your personal statement. And your personal statement, as I was glancing through it, I think you maybe made a very common mistake of trying to be too different. to where you said, I know how everyone writes their personal statements. I'm going to go completely 180 degrees the other way to stand out. And I will tell you that 99.9% of the time that usually backfires. And I think that's what happened with yours as well. So looking at your personal statement, you have this story of your father and being there with your father as he's being a gardener, right? As he's doing landscaping work. And you talk about how you understood how the power of kindness and empathy mirrored into your personal life through interactions with others. And so you are immediately into this kind of sales pitch and saying, I know that as a physician, I have to have empathy and kindness. So I'm going to highlight those in my personal statement. Right? 99.9% of people know that empathy and kindness are important for everyone, and maybe more important for physicians. I don't know if I would argue that or not. But just to be a good human being, empathy and kindness are huge, and kind of maybe why our discord on the internet and elsewhere in life, because we're lacking empathy and kindness towards each other. And so your takeaway experiencing this with your father is, hey, this has been the life lessons of empathy and kindness is what drives me towards medicine. And I would go, well, no, that has nothing to do with medicine. That's important, I guess, to be a good physician. And so you're drawing a lot of these conclusions because you're so focused on, these are the things that I want to highlight. I want to highlight empathy. I want to highlight kindness. And when you start with that sales pitch in mind, with these things that you want to focus on in a personal statement, you're left with drawing these random conclusions that don't really make sense in the end, right? So having those life lessons of that driving you towards medicine just doesn't connect with me at all. So I'm like, okay, let me keep reading, and hopefully something better comes along. And then nothing really better comes along. So again, trying to be a little bit creative here, getting a little bit too different. Is my father always told me there are two secrets behind the art of gardening: overcoming failures and rekindling a connection with earth. The overcoming failures aspect, I can see that you're trying to focus on, hey, I've had to overcome failures. I obviously struggled with my GPA. I struggled with my MCAT, although this was written before your MCAT score came back. So maybe it was a little premonition there. But again, and Mike, why? The question that I always ask is, why am I reading this? And I'm still not sure why, okay? Reconnecting with earth and overcoming failures, great. Sure, let's keep reading. Gardening, you must learn to accept the things that are not always go as planned. Okay, are you trying to sell to me that you're kind of a roll with it kind of person, and you're going to be able to overcome everything as a medical student or as a physician? That's my assumption. I don't like that you're trying to tell me that, because it has nothing to do with why you want to be a doctor. You're just trying to sell me things that you think I think are important, right? Yeah. The next thing I highlight here, it's a process of facing challenges with resilience, patience, and being openly ready to learn, right? So again, sales pitch. It's like my assumption with how you tackled your personal statement, which is how a lot of students tackle their personal statement, is, okay, I need to be able to show that I'm empathetic, that I'm compassionate, that I'm ready to learn, that I'm resilient, that I'm this, that I'm that I'm this, right? That you looked up, you Googled, what are the qualities of a physician? And you said, okay, these are the things that I need to show in my personal statement. And this is what it looks like in the end, is really just you trying to force this narrative that has nothing to do with what the personal statement's about, of why do you want to be a doctor? You're focused too much on, hey, I know what the skills are of being a doctor, and I'm going to show you that I have all of them, right?
Okay, yeah.
And it continues, right? You do a lot of explaining in what your mind medicine is, all right? And I make this argument all the time that you as a pre-med student have no idea what medicine is like. You may work in a surgical center, you may have shadowed 1,000 hours, you may have parents who are physicians, until it's you in the hospital working a 36-hour shift with the patient's life on the line, with your medical license on the line. You have no clue what it's like to be a doctor, right? You may have some ideas. And so the people reading your essays are likely physicians, other healthcare workers that have been around the block. They may know what medicine is like. You don't need to explain it to them. And so as you are reviewing an application, as you're reviewing your personal statement, you can go, hey, okay, does this sentence, is this a generic sentence that is true but doesn't really tell anything about me? Does this sentence try to explain something that I don't need to be explaining? Right, so if I read this sentence here, medicine requires continual learning from each setback, going forth with a new plan, a new understanding, and adaptation to each factor in play, right? So you were setting up the reader with, hey, I'm ready to learn, right? My father always told me that you need to be ready to learn, that you need to be resilient, and oh, by the way, medicine requires this, so hey, I should be a doctor, right? Very, very common mistake that students make. And so a lot of explaining what medicine's like through your personal statement. I actually stopped highlighting stuff because I think most of it is that, right? Of just setting up, here's what medicine is like, here's what I have. Here's what medicine's like, here's what I have. And so at the end of it, I don't really know why you want to be a doctor. I know that your father sounds like he was an amazing person and taught you lots of great life lessons, and you tried to get a little bit too creative with your personal statement. Okay. So I would go back, if you haven't read my personal statement book, I would go back and read that and really soak in the do's and don'ts and what are very common personal statements. Personal statements are common. They shouldn't be super crazy different. Usually students will strike out with those. They should tell your story, not why you think you're going to be a great physician, not that you understand medicine. They should tell the story of why you are doing this because of the experiences and the exposure that you've had and what that meant to you. Okay?
Yeah, that's very helpful.
So that's the personal statement. And then we look at school lists. So are you a California resident?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so California resident. So with that in mind, we'll look at your school list just to give students an idea. So Kaiser, private California, Keck, private California, Loma Linda, private California. Those are all great schools to apply to. Albany, I believe, is private, which is great. Cal, University of Science and Medicine, private school, California school. Loyola, private school. So your school list is actually pretty good in terms of private versus public, out-of-state versus in-state. A lot of students make very bad mistakes doing that. Oregon, obviously public out-of-state school, so maybe not the best school to apply to. A lot of California residents like applying to Oregon because it's close enough to California and it's still West Coast. But Oregon, to accept an out-of-state student, you need to have really stellar stats. Tufts private school, great. And then lots of UC schools, public in-state schools, that makes sense. And then again, Washington. So again, just a very common thing for California residents to apply to another West Coast school. But again, Washington, if you actually look at the data, you look at the realistic chances of getting into Washington as an out-of-state student, it's slim to none. So it's just a wasted $45 or whatever it is. Right? And then time for the secondary and money on the secondary. So it sounds like, just kind of to summarize this journey for you and kind of next steps for you. The MCAT obviously needs to be retaken. It sounds like you were successful preparing for it. Now we just need to not have a computer crash on us.
Yes, hopefully.
Yes, as we move forward. So just unfortunately getting back into that mindset of studying for the MCAT and really setting yourself up for success there. And then as I kind of pull back up your GPA again, really trying to figure out how do I prove to medical schools that I can handle the academic rigors of medical school. Now, you did your graduate program. Why did you do a graduate program in so was it an MPH? Is that what you did?
So the program the title is Masters of Global Medicine.
Okay.
And I actually had applied to MPH programs at the time as well.
Okay.
So I ended up going with the Global Medicine program because it also included the science portion of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I would tell you, so MPH, for just in general for students watching this, MPHs will not help you overcome weak GPAs. And this global medicine one did maybe a little bit because it had a little bit of that science credit that counted. But the majority of your time and money, right, if you just want to think of it from a financial standpoint, the majority of your money went to non-science classes, which you didn't need help with. Right? You need help with the science classes. So if you could have found a graduate like chemistry program or something along the lines where 90% of the classes were science classes, to really focus all of your time, effort, and money into that to improve, because that's where you really needed to focus on.
Yeah.
Moving forward, the question is, okay, do I go do another one of those graduate programs? Or do I do a post-bac, which is, I think, one of the things you brought up at the beginning. And so you don't have any post-bac classes as of yet. It's like official post-bac classes that are listed on your application. And so you could do a do-it-yourself post-bac. You can go and take, and because your science GPA is lower, you can just go and just take a bunch of science classes, a lot of just repeating what you've already taken, a lot of upper division stuff once you have that solid foundation. And I think if you did a year of science classes, maybe even more, like 3 semesters. So if we just kind of generically say, okay, starting spring semester, fall semester, spring semester, that's 3 semesters of grades that are going to be on the next application that will show hopefully as close to a 4.0 as possible, right? Maybe 30 or so credit hours. That may do a good enough job of moving the needle to show the reviewer that you have figured it out, right? That you are academically capable at doing this.
Yeah.
And so that's probably the next steps for you in terms of, from an academic standpoint, really figuring out how to improve. And maybe you don't jump in with both feet, right? Going back to Einstein and insanity, maybe you should just take one class and go, I need to figure this out. I'm going to take one class and only one class, and I'm going to work myself to the bone to figure out what works for me. Right? Not let me take 4 classes all at once and then you end up with a 2.5 GPA again. Let me take one. Let me 1 week try studying this way, and the next week studying this way, and the next week studying this way, and go, okay, now I figured it out, right? And then you pile on some classes. Don't keep repeating the same mistakes, because then it's just more and more and more of a hole to dig yourself out of.
Yeah. Okay.
And then kind of going back to the job that you have now and the increased things that you could be doing there, shadowing, clinical experience, to continue that recency of getting that exposure. And then personal statement, storytelling, and the whole application.
Yeah.
Questions?
Currently, I don't know if my employer's open to that kind of allowing me to do that kind of clinical experience. So as far as like other options for me, like what are other options that I could potentially gain that clinical experience without necessarily having, a certification to something, or if that's, the best option for me to do that?
So I would try with your employer, hopefully. But then there's things like hospice, child life, potentially volunteering at a hospital, volunteering in an emergency department, but really making it clear, like, I don't want to just stock shelves. I don't want to just clean up rooms. I want to be interacting with the patients. Potentially finding a scribe job. Potentially, I don't know what the laws are in California around medical assistants. I know where we are, where I am in Colorado, I'm pretty sure you don't have to have a certificate or any sort of licensure to be a medical assistant, or a CNA or one of those. And so you could find a private practice maybe that has Saturday hours and you don't work Saturdays, and you can go check patients in and take vitals and stuff like that. I mean, bigger picture that does require certificates, things like going and taking an EMT class, things like that are a little bit more time intensive.
Yeah, definitely. And then also for the MCAT, I know I have to retake it. Would you advise for me to, take some of those classes or start taking that first class as far as the DUI post-bac, and then maybe consider the MCAT after that?
Yeah, I don't think the MCAT is necessarily kind of top of mind right now, because you're gonna have to take a little while for the classes for that DIY post-bac. I think you need to focus on that first, right? Because you can go take the MCAT tomorrow and obviously not literally tomorrow, but re-prepare for it and take it and hopefully do well. And then you take a year's worth of classes and you're still at a 2.5, then the MCAT was just a waste of time. And so focus on the classes, and when you think you're ready, right, going back to that fall or spring, fall, spring kind of timeline, if you can get through a spring and fall and you're like crushing it, doing well, then it's like, okay, in the spring, I'm going to have to take a few classes and take my MCAT to prepare for that next application cycle.
Yeah. Okay. And then, I mean, one of the things that I definitely know I have to do is kind of find that solid ground where I can find the best way to study for courses and really prepare for getting that GPA up. So, yeah.
Well, good.
Okay.
Hopefully this will be helpful for you to kind of get you back on the right path and get you going for a successful application next time. Please keep us updated and let us know how it goes, and all the best success to you.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I will.